fireside chat of the day. So we'll welcome Philippe Pouletty on stage, who is the co-founder and managing director of Truffle Capital. Thank you. So Philippe did a lot of stuff in his life and a lot of great achievements. But I think in short, he founded over 20 biotech companies, and it's fair to say he's one of the most active biotech investors here in this country. So Philippe, stage is yours. Tell us how biotech is changing the world.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning. I must say I was a little disappointed by the dancing of these two girls at Moulin Rouge. I was expecting something very different. That's a very sexist comment. I apologize. So there is at least one positive thing in Donald Trump election, right? You've seen that pharma stocks have moved up, and although my children voted for Hillary Clinton, I couldn't vote in the US. A year ago, when Hillary made a few comments about two drugs which had nothing to do with biotech, one for TB, one for toxoplasmosis, where two non-pharma firms bought these drugs which had no generic competition and multiplied the price by 50, that was, of course, outrageous. But to imply that biotech drugs were too expensive and basically closing the window of the IPO market in the US was not very wise from Hillary. So for Donald, at least one positive thing is we may see, again, a good environment for biotech and pharmaceuticals. So, when I see my picture, I think I'm old because I never watch it myself in the mirror in the morning. But what keeps me excited in biotech is reading Nature or Science. So, for instance, if you look at a few articles, some on deep brain stimulation from the cortex, or some on how microglia could affect neuron synapse and explain Alzheimer. All of that is exciting. And why do we continue to see a constant revolution in biotech? Is because academic research on basic science supports disruptive innovation and unthought of revolutions. So engineers always think they can change and improve life, but what we know in biotech is if we can better understand life as it is and at least mimic life, then we can have a revolution. So biotech didn't start in the early 80s. In fact, biotech started 4 billion years ago, and we have had 4 billion years of excellent R&D, and whether you believe in God or not doesn't matter. We have had excellent R&D for 4 billion years, and trying to understand and mimic Mother Nature is, I think, the best way to develop novel therapies and novel devices. And if you look at the first great innovation in biotech, which may have been monoclonal antibodies, it didn't come from someone who said, I want to develop a monoclonal antibody against TNF to treat RA or Crohn's disease. It came from what? Understanding how you could make lymphocytes immortal, Milstein and color, and then discovering how cells talk to each other, the beginning of cytokine, TNF, and many other cytokines. And then joining these two scientific breakthroughs together led to the revolution of therapeutic antibodies, which now is enormous, especially in the field of oncology. So trying to design projects short-term is always a mistake, which may be why, in biotech, and, I have hurt female to begin with. Now I'm going to hurt the feeling of polytechnicians or X in the room. But basically, the ones who succeed are the ones who accept not to know what the end result will be in their projects, but accepts to start from somewhere with excellent scientists, with dreams, and sometimes the end result will not be the project that we had in mind in the beginning. So people who think they can predict the next innovations in 10 or 20 years are just foolish. In fact, what will be the great innovation in 20 years are the ones we have no clue about today, and which will come from one of the academic labs in the US, in Europe, and soon in Asia, and from which startup companies will arise. So in Europe, and especially in France, there is a tendency to focus on short-term projects. And investors often like to have a 300-page business plan with sales forecasts with 3 digits 7 years later, and to know exactly the development path. That's totally ridiculous. Because successful projects will be like sailing in winter from La Rochelle to New York on a 20-foot boat with a very small skilled team, and you don't know the weather up front. You're not sure of your route. You have a mission to go to New York sometimes, and that's how successful companies succeed. Of course, you always have companies who tell you retrospectively, we knew exactly which step to take, everything. That's not the case. So we have great companies in the room. For instance, the Deinov, which we started based on thinking that Deinococcus, which is a 3.5 billion years old bacteria on Earth, was extraordinary, stress-resistant, polymorphic, and so on. And we thought, well, why don't we exploit this very robust bacteria for many applications? And we started with bioethanol and decided recently that given the barrel of oil was priced very low, it might be wise to do something else. And fortunately, the company had worked on novel antibiotics in the last few years, and that's a very exciting focus of the company. And the reason we can do that is when you have a very exciting technology platform that can lead to multiple products, then you have a chance to succeed. Which leads me to intellectual property. I'm sure one of you in the next 30 minutes should have a brilliant idea. Well, most people around you will tell you, well, why don't you make an experiment to prove your brilliant or maybe stupid idea? Why don't you do the next experiment, maybe in animals, to prove it will work? Well, that's foolish, because when someone skilled has a good idea, the first thing he should do is run fast to his patent attorney, write a patent, file it very quickly. Because first file in the world is the rule. The first one who files a patent with a claim will dominate the field. And it's not needed to do any experiment to prove a patent. It's not a publication. You just have to write a claim and to write something which seems reasonable and could be maybe duplicated. And I urge you to file your patents whenever you have an idea. And don't listen to the people who will tell you it's not novel, you won't be able to get patents. So for instance, Deinov, we decided to file very broad claims, often without the experiments behind before filing, and we got issued very broad patents on a worldwide basis. So IP is essential, and what we like to do at Truffle is to read non-published patents under NDA with academic groups in the US, in Europe, and so on. And first, it's very exciting to do. You see very unexpected things. And we like to start companies from very novel patent applications, with inventors who are brilliant and out of the norm. And we don't write a business plan. If we think there is a potential mission behind as a technology platform or as a product, then we may start a company. How do you start a company? Well, first, give it a name. It helps to make it very concrete, file the charter of the company, put a little cash, hire a very good CEO, and get going. Of course, it's tough, right? Especially when you have to raise cash from others. So the reason we can, of course, do that easily at Truffle is when I decided stop being directly an entrepreneur, I wanted to be an entrepreneur investor so that we could continue to start the companies, but instead of begging cash from VCs. By the way, I don't like to be called a VC. I'm an entrepreneur. We could say we put the cash ourselves and we'll increase the funding of the company when needed. Of course, we have also co-investors, but we like to be majority shareholder for a long time. Why do we like that? Because it helps make decisions rapidly. So sometimes the decision may not be wise, but it's better to make decisions rapidly, most of the time good, sometimes bad, than to ask his opinion to 5 board members representing each a different venture funds and having a strong opinion about the color of the door of the company. The other reason we like to do it that way is that management can focus on product development and not necessarily on raising money. To come back on what we like as revolutions in biotech, we like things which mimic life. Again, because we think the 3 billion years of R&D leading to man and woman today has been quite excellent, and trying to do better than what was done during this evolution is extremely risky and may lead to unexpected side effects and so on. So, for instance, we're very excited about Pharnex, one of our companies in the CNS field, which is based on understanding the molecular networks of many diseases. You know, typically a disease, you'll have an imbalance in maybe 10, 20, or 30 different molecules. And the legend raised by Biotech that a gene will lead to a target and easy to target this single target with one drug is basically a rare event. Most of disease is the dysfunction of a network of multiple molecules, and understanding this underlying molecular network is very important to develop drugs. So Pharnex has products in phase 3 and phase 2 trials in CNS, and we'll see where it leads. Another example, and I know one executive is in the room as well, so if I don't name that company, they're not going to be happy, but I named them because they are excellent. Abivax, we formed it on the fact that alternative splicing of RNA was not understood well and not exploited for viral diseases. You know that viruses like to use the framework of cells to replicate, and they can drive RNA splicing very efficiently, and developing antagonists or agonists of RNA splicing can lead to very powerful drugs for HIV, chikungunya, Zika, dengue, and so on. So we talk of biotech, and often people think only of drugs, vaccine, and therapeutics, but for me, biotech is all life sciences. And increasingly, there is convergence between medical devices, drugs, and the digital world. We've been very active in Bioprosthetics. Our most better-known company is Carmat, the total artificial heart company. I started with Alain Carpentier, the surgeon, and Airbus. And it's the kind of revolution we like, because if we succeed, we know we'll change and prolong the life of hundreds of thousands of patients. And as still an MD, that's what excites me most, to think that some of our products can change the life of patients. Of course, when we started the company, everyone said, it's too risky, too complicated, will never work, the heart is too big, blah, blah, blah. And whenever you have lots of people who tells me it's not going to work, that reinforces my thinking that it's truly radical innovation and novel. you need to have opponents for an innovation to be radical, which is why pharma companies don't succeed in radical innovation, since they want consensus building inside the company before launching a very novel projects. So don't listen to other people when you are convinced of your ideas to file a patent. Don't listen to other people's before you push a project. Of course, you still need to convince a few people to join you in your company or to put money in the company. So I think that aside CARMAT, other bioprosthesis we've developed in the transcatheter valve field, in spinal implants, are going to be very successful. And the next revolution for us will be the connected bioprosthesis, because one thing you can do when you implant something in a body, a valve, a heart, a probe, or whatever, is to have digital connection with the outside. And patient care post-surgery, post-implantation is very important. And you need to know for the few patients who have side effects or problems, as soon as possible there is a problem. So classical medicine is the patient complain to his clinician. The clinician will do imaging, number of tests, and acts. You could shortcut all of that very much if you have online connection between a critical tissue, cell, or organ with information that can be read on your smartphone, either by the patient or the clinician. So we are raising a new venture fund of 200 million euros, which will be highly focused on connected bioprosthesis, which is how to mimic tissue and organ functions with complex bioprosthesis and connect it to the outside world. For payers, that can be very important, and for politicians who say that biotech is too expensive, the price of novel drugs and devices should be low, they are just not understanding how progress make. Of course, we all would like everyone on Earth to benefit for every single innovation at once. That's not possible. However, if you think about the 20, 30 years period, a product which is today very expensive and limited to developed countries who can afford it will be in 30 years very cheap and available to everyone. And that's how we should think, not only for biotech, but also for education, economic growth, and so on, that it's not everyone at once who can benefit from progress, but as long that over 1 or 2 generations that's the case, then we should pursue it. Obviously, developing products is expensive, and to attract investors to invest and support development of products and R&D from large or small companies, you need price of products to be sufficient. Of course, you need negotiations between payers and companies. That's very fair, but we need to support, and very much so in Europe, since we spend 1/3 less than in the US in R&D and fueling our biotech companies. Of course, after correction of GDP, we need people to understand this. How is the world changing as well? Well, so far it was mostly the US, a little bit Europe, and of course tomorrow China is going to be a big player. So just before coming here, I was talking to a Chinese investment banker, Irene. She was raised in the US and belonged to a US company first. You have lots of Chinese who have come back from the US. China was extremely skilled to send thousands of postdocs to US universities and bringing them back in academic position or executive position. And China is very fast emerging as a player, buying companies, investing in companies, developing products. Their level of R&D is not yet at the level of the US or Europe, but I think in 20 or 30 years, if we don't react strongly in Europe, China will be much ahead of Europe and will be a contender to the US. So the next 20 years are going to be extremely exciting, and I have no clue whatsoever what will be the next revolution, radical innovation. But what I want to do is to be a part of these next revolutions. Thank you very much.
Great. Great, Philippe. So keep the mic. We'll sit together here. I have to say, it's great. You adapted the scarf to the seats. Yeah, so actually, it was 20 minutes keynote, and now I will ask some questions. And you can send your questions to the email address right here. We have some people collecting it, and then we have also mics in the room, so you can just grab a mic and ask some questions. I guess, Philippe, I have a first question. Is, I guess you're not that young anymore, but you've seen a lot of stuff happening. And
no, I'm 36 years old in my head.
But I guess you've seen a lot of stuff happening, and you've seen really the field evolving from, I guess you're saying 3.5 billions, but I guess when biotech was really started was like with Genentech, when people started really talking about biotech, and you were in Silicon Valley around that time. So how is biotech really different today than it was when it started?
Well, it started in the 76, 77, Genentech on DNA and hybrid tech, which is less known on monoclonal antibodies in La Jolla. And then you had the mapping of the human genome, 93, by Daniel Cohen for the first map. The first companies did, in effect, simple things. They made, with a different manufacturing process, proteins which were existing. So Eli Lilly did recombinant insulin, Genentech with Genentech, and then there was interferon, erythropoietin, and these were skilled methods to produce in mass proteins which we knew worked in clinical practice. EPO was known from sheeps, interferon, and insulin. And from that, people were a little over-optimistic that biotech could do everything. And lots of scientists started to say, we will not just copy proteins, we are going to develop very novel things. And by the way, monoclonal antibodies was the same. Right? It was producing in mass what we have in ourselves, which are effective antibodies. So we had some problems when companies started to be too daring on modeling targets, developing very novel products. And then people realized that you must develop projects which are not too many variables, because treating a patient is very complex. And when you have efficacy, you can, of course, have major unexpected side effects which cannot be predicted either in vitro and or in animal. What has changed today is you have very large number of companies, you have lots of fundings. The pharma companies, some of them were very shy in the 80s or 90s to make deal. All of them make very expensive deal. It's a very well-balanced ecosystem between academia, startup companies, investors, IPO investors, pharma companies, which does not exist, for instance, in green biotech. And let me talk 30 seconds about that. And if I talk too much, you say it.
I will.
But green biotech, when everyone says we're going to clean the planet and develop novel energies and blah, 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 when you see that NG, Veolia, EDF spends more in communication than in R&D, which is less than 0.5% of their total expenditures, of their revenues, you know there is a big problem. Why does it work in healthcare? It's because pharma companies spend 10 to 18% in R&D and can buy very promising companies.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. And I think one of the things I've seen is also how like the technologies and the platform, all the research is built on, is really evolving. Like from, you said, on monoclonal antibody, now it's in protein production, and now we have tools like CRISPR. What's your feeling on that? Like on is there just way more opportunities today than there were like 10 years ago?
Well, you have more platform technologies, more tools, still very strong academic research. So yes, it's much more powerful than 10 or 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Europe was basically not existing in biotech, a little bit in the UK, because the UK is the east coast of the US, and more so now. But continental Europe was not doing much.
And I guess one pretty naive question, but changing the world can be kind of in bad sense as well. I mean, we have some really ethical debate about CRISPR modifying genome, human embryos. Like, what are you scared of?
Not much, but it's interesting that ethical debates are often behind the curve. For instance, the issue is not at all today using embryo cells, because you can differentiate cells from the blood. The ethical debate should be much more focused to me on CNS, because we know we can cure some neurological disease, but we are going to have tools to modify functions, possibly improve brain functions. That should be a very strong ethical debate. And there is a lot of hypocritical statement in ethics. For instance, you have a lot of people who are against the use of embryo. Fine, I respect that. But often they are pro-abortion. So I respect people who are for abortion and the use of embryo. I respect the ones who are against both, but being against the use of embryos but for abortion, to me, makes no sense.
All right. And one thing we were yesterday at the dinners, we had a dinner at the La Payas with the biohacking space, and like I think it's really interesting the do-it-yourself bio movement and all that, like making biotech personal, and like this parallel with the personal computing revolution. Do you believe in that? Like
you mean personalized medicine? Well, it's a buzzword which has been around for
more like
30 years. So there is.
We will discuss that later. I leave that to the panel. It's more about personal biotech, like giving access to technology to people outside the field, like connecting more people, making biotech open, basically.
Well, I don't think biotech is closed, right? It's open to any engineer, scientist, good thinker, MD, who has something interesting to say.
Okay. Great. And then you talked a lot about, I mean, you talked about the differences between Europe, US, China, like how, yeah, will Europe is still like, I mean, there's great discoveries here. Usually it's lacking in like translating into on the market, but like what's your vision? You think now is a good time still for Europe and in the coming 10 years, or will it be completely overpassed by like China or
well,
the US?
You know, Europe is like this big tanker. You think it's going to sink, but it still managed to progress. So I guess that will continue. Now, Europe is pretty good. And in fact, France is probably the best country right now to start a company, because for €1 in equity, you get €1 of state aid, research tax credit, young innovative enterprise, BPI grants, and so on. So for instance, it's much more expensive to operate a company in Switzerland, in Germany, Netherlands, UK, than in France. Also more expensive in the US, but in the US you have the benefit of raising more cash easier at higher valuation. So Europe, I would say France is very good. Germany is not, as a few very good companies, lots of good scientists, but historically less prone to start companies. So we are very good at starting companies right now in France and Europe. We are not good at making these companies world leaders. Why? Because we have huge savings. For instance, 150 billion euros of life insurance saving. 0.5% of that goes to small companies and 0.01% to biotech companies. The day a government or a president understands that the future of the country is economic growth, and that economic growth is fueled by fast-growing new companies, and that these companies will be more in the tech sectors, and that saving need to be directed to these companies, will be the king of the world. But I've been saying that for 10 years, and unfortunately we keep to have presidents who are not very interested in true effective economic reforms.
We'll maybe for 2017, maybe.
Well, yeah, I'm still optimistic.
It's good. Do you have any question in the audience?
Surprisingly, the only one who is talking of that is Montebourg. So, which is to say, never be desperate about someone. He started very left and is making progress.
Went to INSEAD, maybe. Get some good teachers, no? I'm kidding. Do you have any question in the audience? You can raise your hand. Don't be shy.
You spoke about China, just here. But what do you think about India?
Well, I have zero personal experience in India, so I'm not the right person to ask the question. Maybe you can answer this question, no?
Okay, thank you.
Well, in technology, right, IT, they have zillions of engineers. In biotech, it's not, I think, as active as China is.
Yeah, I think for active R&D, it's not, I mean, they're growing, but for manufacturing, I mean, you have dozens of biosimilars already manufactured there. It's getting like the whole production side for biologics in the world, I think. But you can correct me, Sanofi, if I'm saying something wrong. Any other question? Oh, yeah, go on.
Well, I had a question about the sustainability of drug prices. So you're not a believer in personalized medicine, but what we tend to see is that the market for drugs tend to be for less and less patients. So basically, we get more into orphan diseases, which target a smaller group of patients. And since the R&D cost stays pretty much the same, we have less patients to basically retrieve this cost. So if everyone is doing drugs for less patients, overall the drug cost to the system increases. What are your views on the sustainability of these prices?
Well, I think Genzyme will answer this question much better than I would. But I'm not sure, you know, lots of companies focus on rare disease, still lots of companies focus on major disease. Novo Nordisk, you know, it's diabetes and pretty much nothing else. So again, as long as patent life is limited in time, which is very good, as long as you have generic competition for drugs, biosimilars, devices, and so on, over a 30 years period, I think it's very sustainable to have innovation accessible to most of people on Earth. But it will not happen on day one because you need the time first to focus your novel therapies on smaller group of patients who truly need them, where indications have been proven. And you need the time to broaden the indication, improve dosage or delivery or whatever. And then to have a lower cost battle based on generic competition. So, you know, a patent life is 20 years. But basically, you have usually 10 years before the product is on the market. So patent protection of a commercial product in biotech is not that long. You have the protection for rare disease as well, which is a good stimulus for companies to invest in these rare disease. So the system is not perfect, right? But I'm a believer in free adaptation, and whenever you have the states who put too much pressure, you know, I don't think Brits are that happy about the way healthcare functions in the UK, for instance.
A third question? Yeah, there.
To follow up on on the last question, what do you think of value-based pricing, and do you think it's another buzzword, or is this something that will actually change things and the dynamics between payers and the pharma and biotechs, obviously, and how will we adapt as an industry in terms of doing the right clinical trials and the right research?
Well, clinical benefit, medical benefit, I think is a must-have to develop any product. Marginal innovation should not deserve neither huge investment nor high pricing and so on. The question is more to me, who defines what constitutes true value added, and how do you have to prove it in a reasonable manner, knowing that a lot of agencies like to open the umbrella because they are scared to be sued if there is side effects, which was not seen early. So it's a very complex issue, of course, but I always think one should focus its effort on true disruptive innovation, which has a good probability to result in a huge clinical benefit. And in that case, there are much less debate about reimbursement, pricing, and so on.
Great. Yeah, I guess, I mean, if you really change the world, we'll find a way to pay for it. I guess that's
Exactly. Very good buzzword.
And maybe let's get back to this change the world idea. Like you said, it's foolish to predict the future, but I mean, let's be a bit foolish. Like, what's the three big things you see coming in the next 10 years?
But frankly, it's what I truly think. One cannot predict what radical innovation will be 10 years down the road. We can make very general statements about certainly better understanding how the brain works, the microenvironment of tumors and so on. But the one field which I think doesn't get enough academic science is embryogenesis. Because all the people who talk about cell therapy, tissue therapy, and so on, if you don't understand the event which happens basically at a minute level in an embryo, you know, where cells talk to each other, where the neural cord talk to the renal tissue and so on, you cannot develop real products for, let's say, cell-based, complex cell-based therapy. So if I was in charge of academic research funding, I would put a huge effort on the understanding of embryogenesis and why can a mouse in 30 days make a full organ, a full mouse? Why does it take 9 months in women and much more in elephants?
Let's turn the question otherwise. I will tell you who the three top things I see in 10 years, and you tell me what I see. Like the three really exciting things we cover, and which has tremendous potential, especially in health, is like CAR-T, CRISPR for gene therapy,
but sorry,
and mRNA technology. So what do you think about it? It's technologies that takes like 10 years to develop?
You told me the future. You are talking about the past. This is the past. This is ongoing. Okay. So sure, it's happening, but that's not the future.
Okay, let's reformulate. But it's what's in very early stage right now and will hit the market in the next 5 to 10 years. But so what's your feeling about these three technologies?
You know, I think some results are very promising. Specificity is an issue. So you know, there will be disappointment with a lot of side effects. But yes, there will be products. What will be very interesting is what has happened in immuno-oncology, which is a true revolution. I don't know if you have seen, for instance, the results of Inet Pharma clinical trial with BMS and so on. Very exciting. But translating that to immunovirology is going to be very exciting. And here again, it's using Mother Nature, right, your immune system, to destroy target cells or viruses.
And why didn't you invest in any CAR-T or CRISPR or mRNA?
Well, because I was stupid.
Okay, it's honest. And I guess, one surprising thing is also most of these technologies are developed like in Boston. and you have some very successful also early stage VCs who are also founding companies like you. I mean, Flagship, Third Rock, Atlas, and I had a chat with one of them, and they said like, oh, in Europe, most of the early stage VCs like fail at doing that and founding companies beside like Truffle and Versant. Why is that? What's your...
No, you have other funds like Sophie Nova who invest also early, but you know that Selectis is a French company pretty active in CAR-T as well. But the difference between VCs in the US and in Europe is pretty much that a lot of VCs in the US are former entrepreneurs or executives in R&D, marketing, and so on from biotech or pharma companies, which means that they know what they are talking about. Without any criticism on any colleague, are there French VCs in the room? Ah, a few. So French VCs are excellent, but but elsewhere in Europe, you find a good number of VCs who are more from the financial world. And frankly, to decide to invest in an early stage company, you don't need to be a specialist of balance sheet or P&L, right? You need to be a little skilled in science, R&D, in biotech, otherwise you increase the number of mistakes. So when you don't have this background, you'll tend to invest in more mature companies or invest in rounds of financing with other VCs, because if it fails, you can say, I was not the only stupid investor, we were stupid as a group, which is a good excuse. So I'm going to make an additional number of friends with that sentence.
It's perfect. Yeah, one last question.
Okay, so I said we see a lot of very convincing science and technology in vitro and in animal models, but when it spins out, it can often fail in phase 1 clinical trials. So I've got two questions. One is, how do you think we can better tailor our animal models and our in vitro research for good therapeutic outcomes? And two, when you invest in early stage ideas, what's your screening method? How do you decipher whether something's going to be a failure or a success?
So the first one is a very important issue, which is why, for instance, with SparNext, we like it because we start from human molecular networks, understanding this. We test drug candidates on human cells, and then we confirm in animal models. And we have been able to get fast to the clinic with little tox problems and early efficacy. When you start from human physiology, when you start from, let's say, screening chemical entities and then showing something in animals, the risk is indeed much higher because there are huge differences between inbred mice and the human being. And often the models, the animal models, are the ones others use. So you say, let's use these, they're proven, validated, and so on, but they may not be that relevant. So a nod mouse model, yeah, it's a little indicative of diabetes, but very different from human diabetes. So you have these barriers, which is to say you need multiple drug candidates to have a chance of having one which will succeed in phase 2 trial. If you have a single project, well, the risk is very high of failure. So how do we decide on our side? One, do we have strong existing or potential IP? It's essential because if you have a very narrow IP, you risk that your first product will fail and you have nothing. If you have a very broad field, well, even if your first product fails, you have potentially dominant IP. Second, if it succeeds, will it change the world? That's very important to us. You know, if it's as much work to work on marginal innovation as compared to a true revolution. So it's better to spend our time on true potential revolution. And then do we have brilliant unbearable people, because brilliant people are often very big egos, difficult and so on, but it's lots of fun. So to succeed with a company, you need brilliant scientists, brilliant executives, very good board of directors, a good balance between fire in the belly of the founders often, and experience of the VPs. And that's how we start. And sometimes we fail, we are wrong, and sometimes we adapt. You know, as I said, a company is not a straight line.
Great. Great conclusion. Good luck to change, continue to change the world. Yeah.
Thank you very much.